Welcome to the Real Estate Reserve Podcast with your hosts, Jason Balin and Ian Horowitz.
Hey, what's going on?
What's up, man?
always jamming to the theme music.
I like it. I don't know what to tell you. So
nice. Well, we're gonna have a really good show going on today. Today's April 24th, Friday. If you're just tuning in for the first time, we always timestamp all of our shows because, hey, things have been changing so rapidly here in the local real estate investing space. So we want to make sure, some stuff we talked about yesterday may potentially change tomorrow. So we want to make sure we do this. So this is what we got on the show today. We have Jerry Lotz that's going to hop on and talk about cost segregation. Honestly, a very new topic for me. I had actually never heard of it. But when Ian explained it to me a few days ago related to potentially decreasing the time that it takes to depreciate one of your assets, like one of your rental properties, I was intrigued. So Jerry's going to hop on here in a second. And then we got some stuff. We have a case study and a presentation to go through to make it very, very self-explanatory so you understand it. And then we've got a few other industry news to go through as well. So, all right, let's bring Jerry on real quick, and we will go from there.
Hey, guys.
Jerry, what's up, man?
Pleasure to be here with you all today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So I've recently met Jerry through our accountant just a short time ago, a few months ago, and it's a strategy that's really opened my eyes. And I thought it was super important to bring him on here. We're actively going through yes, Brian Dick, thank you. I will turn my camera off. I'm actively going through this process on our portfolio now. A tax strategy I know that's used by some larger investors. And hopefully Jerry will be able to walk us through it because I still have trouble understanding it. I get what I'm doing, but it's always good to hear it again. So he's going to do a case study for us. So Jerry, just a quick background about who you are and where you're from and how you got involved, I guess, in cost segregation.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a Baltimorean through and through. Lived in Baltimore all my life. I come from a medical sales background, traveled extensively, but Baltimore's always been my home. And when the medical career was winding down, and even during that time, I always had a passion for, thought I could do something on my own. And when the medical career was winding down, I was first introduced to networking, met a lot of folks, and actually came across the people that I do a lot of my work for right now. So I work for myself, just like you guys and a lot of our listeners out there. And I represent a few different companies. The mission behind what I do is tax savings and cost savings. So a few years back when I met the folks at CSSI, Cost Segregation Services Incorporated, out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I was just thoroughly impressed. The integrity, the fact that they've been around for 18 years or so and completed projects on well over 20,000 properties across every state in the country, just spoke to the integrity of what they do. So I decided to take a trip down, met with their folks, and couldn't be any more pleased. They have my back. They have the backs of the clients that I'm working for, the building owners, and certainly the tax professionals that we work for as well. So, that's perfect way to start. So, if you want to,
I was going to say, why don't you just explain maybe in 20 seconds, 30 second elevator pitch of exactly what cost segregation is.
Okay, so typically, cost segregation is taking a building and segregating the assets that make up that building. There are some assets that are more structural that will remain to be depreciated over a 39-year timeline for commercial buildings. For residential rental properties, multifamily properties, that's 27 and a half years. But there are other intrinsic assets that make up that building. Maybe it's carpets, cabinets, countertops, special electric, special plumbing that can be carved out of that 39-year asset and put into a 5, 7, or 15-year category. So somebody's got just use a $275,000 2-apartment rental. You're depreciating $10,000 every year for 27 and a half years till you fully depreciate that building. But in that building, there may be $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, $70,000 worth of those assets that can be pulled out and depreciated much more quickly. So cost segregation, pulling those assets out, gives that building owner more deductions early on up front to offset their income, so they significantly reduce their tax burden.
Right. And this is a strategy, I guess it's commonly used a lot more in commercial real estate. That's why a lot of us single family real estate investors don't see it as much. Or is it something new, or how did this originate?
Good question. Good question. So back in the late 90s and 2000 or so, there was a landmark court case, Hospital Corporation of America against the IRS. Hospital Corporation of America won that case, and that really put cost segregation on the map. Now, interestingly enough, the guy who's the president of CSSI, the company for whom I work, was commissioned by the attorney that won that case to come up with formal protocol to bring cost segregation to a level that people could really access. So when it first came out, it was truly for the big four accounting firms, the mega $1 million complexes. But now, through experience and technology, we can find oftentimes value in buildings, and single family homes and things, a couple $100,000 and above.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. So I guess this is the Jim Shreve is the one that you were talking about here.
Yeah. Jim is the owner of the company. I can't say it enough. Just a kind of a salt of the earth kind of a guy, and has taken his personality and culture and ingrained that, and just kind of attracted other like people. I can call one of our VPs and access them immediately to, if there's a question, if one of the tax professionals that we're working with has a question, we'll hop on a call and work through things. They're just great people.
Okay. So, and so far from what we've dealt with, it's been awesome, and we're learning. And I guess this is where we get into the nuts and bolts. I know we skipped a few slides, but we've kind of figured out who you are. But
it's okay, sure.
So just for me, sometimes it's easier for me to chew up the information. The way I understand cost segregation, and maybe you can dive deeper, is normally you just put all your cost basis into the property. You rehab, you buy a property, you rehab it. Say you're all in for $100,000. And then you just depreciate it for 27 and a half years, and most people don't even think about it. Right. This allows us actually to pull out some of those things, reduce our cost basis, but take those advantages up front. And I guess, is that kind of the best understanding of it? Yes,
it is. Yeah, that's a great understanding. So in this formal slide, there's a formal, explanation of what cost segregation. It's really the process analyzing and identifying those components that are eligible for accelerated depreciation. And all that's done in accordance with IRS guidelines, the end result being cash flow. Typically, for every $1 million worth of a property, we end up finding anywhere from $50,000 to $80,000 in tax savings for every $1 million worth of a property. So okay. If you want to hop the next slide.
Yep, that's fine. We can go.
Okay. So I like to explain cost segregation using the analogy of a Big Mac. Everybody's familiar with the jingle, all beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese. McDonald's made a ton of money using that jingle, and that's so appropriate for what we do. If you think of a Big Mac and think of it as a building as a whole, and then think of what we talked about, straight line depreciation, where you take that whole building and break it into equal increments over 27 and a half or 39 years. So the Big Mac, or the building as a whole, is really the hamburger. What we do is put values on the all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions, and that's how we segregate a building, by breaking that property down into its assets.
Yeah, I love that analogy. When I got to peek at your slides beforehand, that's where it really starts to make sense. It's almost like the sales pitch, or what you're taking apart from it. So
yeah, it's fun to to actually have a Big Mac box live on a exhibit table somewhere. I do a lot of work with tax professionals and spend a lot of time at their conferences, and I'll have a Big Mac there, and I get a lot of funny comments. Well, is that breakfast, lunch, or dinner? What are you doing with that?
Yeah.
This next slide really kind of gives you a breakdown of some of those assets that can fall in that 5 and 7 year category, and then into the 15-year category. Even the lines on the parking lot are part of what goes into some of those 15-year assets, and that can be depreciated more quickly.
Right. And just so for the people that are listening at home, because this is going to replay for people on podcasts, or if you want to revisit this, your 5 to 7 stuff is your decorative elements, your electrical, some of your electrical stuff, carpets, cabinets, security, communication, and 15-year stuff's landscaping, paving, fencing, more of your big ticket items. And while we're here on this slide, I'm going to ask you a quick question. I don't know if we're going to get into this later, but there's just some items, like I don't notice windows on here. There's just some items or roofs. There's certain ones of those things you can't advance the depreciation. It's still going to be 27 and a half or 39 years, depending what type of building you're in. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, that's a reasonable statement. Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
True statement. Yep. So, and a lot of those, major structural components like that. Now, just because you can't advance necessarily the depreciation on some of those things doesn't mean that there are not other tax strategies that you may be able to use when thinking about replacing those things.
Right.
And that's getting a little further into the weeds, and I don't want to, for our purposes today, won't go too far there.
Well,
Jerry, is the logic behind some of these shorter term depreciating assets is because it's the life expectancy or closer to the life expectancy of these particular things? And for instance, if you put flooring in place, chances are you might not have the same flooring for 27 and a half years. You might need to turn it over multiple times.
Yeah, there's some of that logic in place. But it really it goes back to I guess the Bible of this which is part of the IRS tax code. So they've used some logic in determining some of those factors, and that's that's really all we can go by at this point.
Right. And not to derail you too far off of this presentation, because I want to keep it moving, but is there a difference between the words accelerated depreciation and bonus depreciation?
Yes, there is. That's a great question. There are a couple different types of bonus depreciation. If you want to hop to the next slide.
Oh, yeah. See, I'm ahead of myself.
That's okay. That's okay. And the Tax Cut and Job Act 2017 really kind of says that you can take bonus depreciation, which is at 100% on a lot of those items that you actually put into an accelerated depreciation category. See, but before the Tax Cut and Job Act, we had the opportunity of placing, identifying and evaluating assets that could fall into a 5, 7, or 15-year class life. And that's what we did. If we had $100,000 worth of carpet that was in 5 years, we would write off $20,000 every year for 5 years until we've written that off. Now the IRS with the Tax Cut and Job Act says that anything that's in 5, 7, or 15-year categories can be written off 100%, which is huge. It's unbelievable. I'll digress for just a quick second here. One of my favorite stories is a guy. Now, this is a commercial property guy that owns probably a dozen Dunkin' Donuts and spent $1.2 million in building another property. So here he spends $1.2 million back in 2018. Beautiful parking lot, landscape, state-of-the-art interior, canopies, drive-throughs. Of that $1.2 million, we came in and provided a study to break out assets and found $600,000 that could be written off in that first year. Wow. So he's looking with all those properties that he's got, he's looking at paying taxes that year on $700,000 worth of income. So we just cut his tax exposure to only $100,000 worth of income now that he's paying taxes on it.
Yeah, that's where I view the power in this study.
Yeah.
Is that that's where it really comes in, is your really potential of reducing your AGI.
Yeah.
Now with the bonus depreciation, so everything that was to summarize that in 5, 7, and 15 years, there's a potential you can just take it the year you do this study if you so choose.
That's correct. If that property was placed in service after September 27th, 2017, because that's when the Tax Cut and Job Act was in effect.
Okay, that makes
and it actually works. It doesn't have to be brand new property, so it doesn't have to be something just bought. If you, just built. If you bought something that was 100 years old and you bought it after September 27th, or into 2018 and beyond, those assets that can be recategorized could be depreciated 100% that first year.
Right. Yeah, and that's, so everyone knows, that's all we do is we renovate properties. We don't do any construction, so this is why it didn't apply to us.
Right.
And I think you got a pretty good study here. If you want to walk us through it.
Yes. Yeah. This is just another example, and this specifically is on a multifamily type of a property. So the building cost, it was acquired in 2018, January. The building only, not the land, but the building, was at $2.2 million. Using that straight line 27.5-year depreciation model, in that first year, they would have been able to expense or depreciate $76,670. The next year, they would have added another full year's worth of depreciation to that. And then by 2023, they would have accumulated $476,000 in depreciation expense. So this is, in this case study, we give estimates of, when we look at a property, we would give an estimate of how much depreciation we can find. So we estimated that they would be able to depreciate not $76,000, but an extra $528,000 would go into that 5, 7, and 15-year category combined and qualify for that 100% bonus depreciation. So the increase in depreciation in that first year, and they get their big bang for their buck because they're getting 100% in that first year. The increase in the amount of depreciation that we find totally is about $509,000 worth of extra depreciation using a segregated model as opposed to a straight line model. And at a 37% tax bracket, that client is saving $188,000 in taxes. So they don't have to stroke a check to the IRS for $188,000 worth of taxes. Now that is on a, for an active real estate investor. So somebody who is, actively in the market, that classifies themselves and with their accountant as an active full-time real estate investor, they would be able to take those deductions and apply that to their real estate income. Right. Somebody who may be a doctor, for example, and decide to buy a beach condo and rent it out during the summer, they could still do this, but they could only apply their extra deductions to the income that's generated from that specific property. They could not offset their doctor income by, renting 1 or 2 properties like this.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Yeah. And so in this example, under the alternative method, they're taking $528 in year 1, and then the total in 2023, instead of being $476, they're at almost $890 in cumulative depreciation.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, so you're talking about, my God, $414,000 of added depreciation or added reduction in taxes that they potentially had to pay. So that's huge.
That much extra depreciation that translates into, yes, a huge number in tax liability. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So there's the CARES Act. Everybody's heard a lot of hype about that. It's in the news all the time. There were a few hidden things in that CARES Act that are very, very, that most people don't hear about. that are very, very pertinent for building owners. Back in the Tax Cut and Job Act, when Congress defined what's called as QIP, or quality improvement property, they clarified how they defined that in the Tax Cut and Job Act. And now anything that can be identified as what's called an interior improvement of a commercial building. So this doesn't have anything to do with residential rental or multifamily properties, but QIP is on the commercial side. But anything that was identified as QIP can now be depreciated at 15%. In the 15-year property, which can be depreciated at 100%. So, and then the other big thing that may have resonate well with a lot of our listeners is this carryback of a net operating loss. So, if somebody had profitable years in 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19, they could actually perform one of these studies on a property or multiple properties in 19 and end up with way more deductions to offset their income from 19, and then take those leftover deductions or expenses and retroactively apply them to profitable years 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and potentially get tax refunds on those years. So that's huge as well.
Yeah, that's huge. And to be clear, in that study that you were doing up here, had they not been able to use the $509,000 in year one, normally you would carry it forward to year 2020 if we were, 2021. Right. But now you're saying they can potentially use this as look back to offset old income.
Yes, exactly.
Got it.
So when you look at cost segregation, who qualifies and who benefits, basically it's anybody that owns property, buildings, and a lot of people that even lease property. We do a number of projects for people who go into strip centers and the landlord gives them $100,000 toward their build out. They spend another $200,000 of additional money on, that they're spending that's theirs to really build out the space. And we go in and segregate the $200 worth of assets that they've spent on their own money. So a lot of leaseholders can benefit from this as well. And just about any type of building that's out there. I mean, we've done, a lot of multifamily, a lot of self-storage, a lot of restaurants, cannabis farms, refineries, just about anything you can think of can benefit.
Any business that has real estate, right?
Any what?
Any business that resides or utilizes real estate in their business that they lease or they own.
Yes.
I mean, does it make sense potentially for? I mean, because obviously, there's time and cost associated with doing this. I'm not sure if this is something that a normal CPA can just do on an investor's behalf, or if they have to retain companies like yours in order to help them. But is this something that makes sense for, a single real estate investor that might have a few properties, 1 or 2 properties, or maybe 10 properties? Because assuming, obviously you have to look based on, cost, time, savings to see if it's worth retaining that. I mean, is there clients that do it on a one-off basis? Or usually, like, what's the threshold to make sense?
Well, the property size threshold or value threshold, we typically say anything $200,000 and above, but we'll bend a little bit from there. So, I've done studies in the $150,000 property building value and above. As a company, CSSI has done, $150,000 condo up to $1 billion+ resorts. So it's really a matter of allowing a company to, a cost segregation company to run what's called a pre-analysis. Now, we do that all day long. There's no charge to have that done, and it really it gives a best guess estimate based on us taking that specific property, benchmarking it up against, the segment of those 20,000 plus properties that are fit into a similar category. and then coming back with some numbers to say, hey, this project is going to generate potentially $20,000 in tax savings, and the after-tax cost for us to do the work is going to be $3,000. So, I oftentimes say, well, if you had $3,000 and went to Las Vegas and came back with $20,000, would that be a good day for you?
Yeah. So you're saying $100,000 in improvements or $100,000 property value? Let's say I buy a property for $100,000. I'm just trying to use a standard deal on a one-off deal because most of our viewers are, residential real estate investors. Let's say they buy a property for $100,000. They put $50,000 into it and they hold it as a rental, and that's just one deal. And let's say they do multiple deals. I'm guessing if they just do one in particular, it might not make sense. But as they do multiple ones,
I would love an opportunity to run the numbers. One is, depending on how long they've had it, this is something that does not have to be engaged when somebody first buys a property. There's opportunities to go back, even if somebody's bought it, 2, 3, 5, 7 years ago, and run some numbers and see if it makes sense to do that. So it's really, somebody buys a building. So if they pay $150,000 for the package, $100,000 is designated towards building. Then they put another $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 in improvements in that. All of a sudden, now that building basis is 100 plus that 50, 60, 70, whatever. And that certainly is, something worth taking a look at.
Yeah. And do you think that most clients that you work with, you're probably working directly with their CPAs as well. Do the CPAs grasp this and understand the concept of it?
It's funny. I work with a lot of tax professionals, and that's part of what we do. We're the engineering-based calculation company that gives the tax professionals the numbers to apply to the return. So we give credence to the numbers that they apply to return. A lot of tax professionals over the years have adopted this. A lot of them have kind of turned a blind eye to it. A number of them had said, well, I can pick off certain pieces of low-hanging fruit and, accelerate some things. And some of them are pretty darn good at it. But having an engineering-based company that is using, customized and some very sophisticated and off-the-shelf software combinations to figure this all out, really adds credence to the process. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, not to cut you off, but there's a form, like when you guys do this, there's a form that's then sent. Is that something that, is good for audit purposes? If you start showing these crazy depreciations, like, is there something that someone specifically has to do, or can they just go to their accountant and say, hey, I want to do this,
If somebody goes to their accountants and say, hey, I've heard of cost segregation. I've got, a couple properties. What do you think? And hopefully between the accountant and the client, they'll say, well, yeah, these properties, you put $100, you bought it for $100, you put another $80,000 or $100,000 into it. Let's let somebody run an estimate on the benefits. So then, a cost segregation company could run the estimates, and they might estimate, $50,000, $60,000 in extra depreciation and a cost of, $4,000 or $5,000 to do the project.
Right. And, that's another thing that I noticed in your package is that the fee to actually do this is actually something that can be written down as well against your income. I think is something that was included when we were looking at us. Just so everybody knows, we went back and actually studied properties that we bought in 2018, I think, 17, 18, somewhere in that we're going back and looking at now. And we picked out of our portfolio, we only picked out 4 or 5 properties, a few single families, a small apartment building, and a warehouse that we own. And I'll tell you guys why we did that in a second. But I forget where I was going. This is why I shouldn't talk. I apologize, Jerry. But yeah, so we were doing a look back, And the reason we're okay with pulling out just a few, our cost basis on a lot of our properties are actually well below the 150 threshold. And the ones that do meet it, and that's kind of where my question's going, I guess, is if in the event, like, so if you advance all this depreciation or you take bonus depreciation, is there a possibility in year 10, if you don't acquire anything else, that you have exposure now to taxes? You know what I mean? Like,
that's a good question. So you're only taking bonus depreciation typically on, those 5, 7, 15-year assets. And you're still always going to have a large portion of that property that's going to remain in that 27.5-year depreciable category. So but you're getting that money up front on those 5, 7, 15-year assets. So what can you do with that money today to make more money?
Right. 100%.
That's the key. You're never going to run out of depreciation until that building's fully depreciated, because you're still always going to have the basic construction that's going to remain in that 27.5-year timeline.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If anyone else has got any questions for Jerry, feel free to pop them up. I did see someone asking if there will be a replay or recording. This is always up on Facebook, YouTube, on all of our channels. You can also find us at realestatereservepodcast.com. All the podcasts are up there, along with we're on iTunes, Stitchers, Lisbon, you name it. You'll be able to find this somewhere, shape, or form. But no, it's a real interesting concept. And when it was presented to me, you're like, no, there's no way this is possible. You're just going to screw yourself down the line. But, when you really look at it, and especially now that you can do look back on past taxes, I mean, you could literally wind up getting a refund check if you have enough depreciation to carry backwards, right? With the carryback. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing to me is it makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of logic behind this in general, right? The whole thing related to 27.5 years, like I do understand, even though it's obviously not in any of our favor, but I do understand their concept behind it. But, in order to depreciate some portion of these assets over a quicker period of time, I do believe there's logic behind that, which is good. But and that being said, I think the play really would be is to, look internally inside your own portfolio and, see if you've done major improvements, or if if it makes sense to potentially do it, and then maybe reach out to Jerry and have him run whatever you call that, Jerry, your
pre-analysis. Yeah.
Pre-analysis to see if it makes sense, because, if it doesn't make sense, no harm, no foul.
And that's actually an interesting question I got for you is, say you own a property with expansion that's available on it, and you own it and you go to do that expansion. Is it something that you could pick up, say, 5 years from now and say, 10 years from now and say, hey, I did this expansion. Can you cost seg just this expansion for this new added building that we put on our property?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And there may be some advantages of, just wrapping it all, the old building with the new addition. Sure. Wrapping it all together.
Got it. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Looks like you got a nice shout out from Pete Belden. I know he has a few Airbnbs that are meet your threshold, and it's tremendously informative, and he'll be reaching out to you. Cool. So Jerry, I've got your slide up here, but what's the best way to get a hold of you? And you got anything else for us that you want to leave us with?
I'd just like to say two things. First off, thanks so much, guys, for allowing me to participate with you, and thanks to the audience for listening and engaging. We appreciate that. Whether a property is newly bought, newly built, even if it's been owned for a number of years, there's a good chance we can find tax savings. When I was in medical sales, I worked for a boss who about 11:45, there's a dozen of us or so in the room listening to him, and the VPS is up there. Our stomachs are growling. We're hungry as anything. We can smell the food outside the room. He turns from the whiteboard and cocks his head and he says, you know what? You don't know what you don't know. And I thought about that, and all of us, we're saying, what the heck is he talking about? And the room was silent, but then the light bulb went off. You really don't know what you don't know unless you take a closer look and allow us to run some numbers. So
Yep.
we do this all day long. I'm sure CSSI runs probably 5,000-6,000 of these pre-analysis reports every year. So happy to do it. As far as connecting with me, my cell number usually works quickest, which is 410-960-8269. And my email address, jlotz, Lotz, at COSTSEGES.com. I'm in Baltimore, but I'm not geographically bound. I can work with building owners and tax professionals in any state. So thank you so much.
Yes, thanks, Jerry. Glad you could come on. I hope everybody found value in this, and look forward to getting our portfolio done with you.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Have a great weekend.
Jerry. Appreciate it.
See you, Jerry.
Yeah.
Still gotta figure out the backwards.
Yeah, that is true. No, all good stuff. I mean, I like presentations like that. I believe that there's a lot of value to most of the audience because they're all real estate investors, and right now seems to be rental properties seem to be a very good strategy. Not that flipping houses or other strategies aren't still very strong in this market, but I think a lot of people are gearing up towards doing more longer term assets. Who knows if that's going to happen or not, but I think that seems to be the trend, that a lot of people want to jump into more rental properties or continue to expand their rental portfolios. And this is a good way to do it. And, I think it makes sense. I believe there's actually a lot of logic behind this cost segregation. And I don't believe that I've heard this concept before in the past, but I think it makes sense. I mean, certainly for someone like you, Ian, it makes sense because that's the core part of your business and you guys have so many of them. And, the thing is when you do one of these pre-evaluations, what makes sense is, keep in mind, you don't need to utilize, go all in on that strategy, right? You determine what makes the most sense. Some people, I believe when we were talking, Ian, you only have like 2 or 3 buildings that you're going to utilize, some of this for, because you'll be able to depreciate, a big chunk of that to offset gains over the next few years.
Yeah, exactly. We're doing, I think we're doing 4 or 5. After it was all said and done, because my big fear, and I'll be straight up honest with everybody, my fear was that we go and bonus depreciate everything, and then 5-10 years from now we got this major tax exposure, but at least we know what the taxes are today. But after talking with Jerry and our tax accountant, I mean, honestly, this is something you need to work with your accountant and a company like his, or if you're going to do it on your own, work with your accountant and say, this is what I'm doing. And like you said, put it in your toolbox, man. You don't need to use it on every single deal. Just have it as a toolbox. And the other nice thing is, I know we got a lot of business owners on here. I mean, just what he was talking about, if you own if you sell flooring and you have a showroom and you're building out your showroom and you're leasing the property, you can do a cost seg study and get available depreciation and other tax advantages by doing the study. So I thought it was interesting that you're able to utilize it in a few different fields besides just real estate, which we usually only talk about, but I know we do have a lot of business owners on here. Think about your buddy that runs all those like patient first type places. It'd be probably a great thing for him to utilize, Yeah,
no, you're right. No, it makes sense. It's good to know. What else do we got in the news right now before we hop off and potentially introduce what's going on next week?
Did we talk about it yesterday that they passed the second PPP Act?
I don't think we did, but yes, I saw that.
Yeah, I'm sure we're late to the game on that. So
yeah, it was exciting during the first one, and then it was like, okay, cool, they passed another one, great. But I mean, that's helped so many people because so many, a lot of it, there's been so much advice out there related to do it through your local bank. Not that there hasn't been a humongous portion of funds getting distributed through Bank of America's and the Wells Fargo's of the world, but it's just that through your local bank, you can get more personalized service. And it looks like a lot of these banks now are taking outside customers and not just banking customers to do it. So that's helpful. One other thing I was going to bring up that I was bombarded via email with today, which I'm happy about, is a lot of new updates with SSTAT, State Department of Assessment and Taxation. If you're in Maryland, there's a lot of more online tools that they're offering now, especially related to, creating new entities online, reinstating your entities online, things like that. I know you used to be able to create an entity online. I don't know about the reinstatement part. I'm looking at it now. That was one thing that I think they put out there because, you go to settle on a property or you go to settle on a loan, and then you realize, your personal property tax wasn't paid and past due. And again, all it is, typically paying the filing fee of $300 a year. But you used to have to go down there and deal with that on Preston Street. And that was just a pain in the neck for so many people. And I actually am not sure if that's new or not. It just looks like, based on this email, that you can reinstate everything now completely online. So I'm glad Maryland's business services are more online. And I think that is somewhat the interesting part of where this whole epidemic has gone, with tools and resources more online instead of in person. And, obviously no one hopes that in-person stuff in general disappears, because I don't think it will. And I don't think that's good for anybody, but it is good to have resources. And, they're putting resources in place right now in order to make a lot more things online, in the school systems, business resources, real estate resources, things like that. So I was kind of happy to see some of that.
Yeah, I'm looking at the email too. Some of these things, I think you can already do them online, but they're presenting them as 14 new online services, so take advantage of it. And hopefully it is here to stay. I think we've talked about it a lot, that a lot of things have been antiquated, and this is forcing the hand to bring everybody up in today's current climate of technology. So I think it's good for everybody involved. It sucks that this is the way it had to come about, but at least it's coming about. I heard an interesting stat yesterday. I was listening to a fund manager who owns, I think, upwards of $100 million or $150 million worth of commercial or multifamily assets. He said in their facilities, now granted they're not here, but they've seen a major uptick in new move-ins via virtual online move-ins. I'm interested. I've put an email out to the guy, see if he's willing to jump on and talk about it. But he said they had 22 move-ins across their portfolio, or maybe it was across one property, he said, which is huge for them. They average 10. So people are still moving and shaking from what we can tell. And things are slowly reopening. So
sure.
Cool.
So I think next week we have a real estate agent. Some more. I like bringing real estate agents in. And the reason why is, obviously, like, I like to see what real estate investors are doing in general, but like real estate agents talk to a lot of people. They always have a book of business with buyers and sellers, potentially tenants and things like that. Most of the agents in general are a little bit more reliant on accessing properties, with showings with buyers and things like that. So I like to see how they're adapting to this. Not that real estate investors are not, but typically it just seems like, agents are a little bit more on front line. So we have some agents coming in, and we've got some other real estate investing guests as well. And then we don't have our case study lined up for next Friday, but we've been doing case studies similar to this, related to deals in the past that we were involved in. I know this one we haven't done before, but the previous weeks we've been doing real case studies of deals that either we lent on or Ian's purchased or other members of our group or viewers have been watching. Because case studies and storytelling, like, those are the best deals to learn from. That's just the easiest way to learn, is when people tell a story about a real life experience they had and how the numbers shook out. So we'll continue to make sure we do that on Fridays.
Well, I see Pete Belden's watching. I know he's been swamped because he's in the medical field. But please, Pete, tell him you're taking off next Friday. I would love to show everybody your case study on your Airbnbs, how great they were doing, and how you quickly changed gears to fill your Airbnb so you weren't caught holding the bag. He did something very interesting, and I would love for him to jump on here. So I'm waiting for Pete to do that. I know he's just swamped dealing with supply issues. And I see Brian Dick. If you're still on here, I'm calling you out to jump on here, hop on here, and tell us how your business is going. I know you flip a lot of high-end properties in the Baltimore area. I'd love to hear how your business has changed. So.
Was your camera off? I didn't even realize.
Oh, he was saying turn it off because he can't stand to look at me. So he was messing.
Got it. It took me 45 minutes to realize that.
Someone was making fun of me. You didn't pick that up right away.
I don't know. I didn't put it together. My head was in another place. What
your target? So
I wasn't thinking about that. So
what? What's the big plans, man? You got any big plans for the weekend? It's supposed to be nice out.
Is it?
Let's see. 64 tomorrow, man. We got to do something. I'd say go golfing, but we can't do that here.
Well, we can play. We can play our online golf game that we got.
I do have it over here.
I play here and there.
All right. Well, I think we should do a Saturday recap on Instagram tomorrow. I think it's always good. And
yep, we'll do. Yep. Follow us at Hard Money Bankers on Instagram, or what's your Instagram? Equity _ warehouse.
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
Got it. All right, everybody. Check you later.
Thanks for tuning in to the Real Estate Reserve Podcast. Do us a favor and like, comment, and share our broadcast. It helps the algorithm and helps us spread the word too. Till next time, thank you for tuning in.